Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the work on this so far. It's been awesome to see. And I guess actually I don't know who, and now that we're like sort of on library time, like who is moderating this week? Who should I be passing it to? Is it QZ? Are you kind of taking the reins?
No, so Ben will be helping to moderate the text side of things, and we have uh, so so my brain is lagging a bit because I just took my booster, so half dead. uh, it's Case. Her handle is Case. Forgot her name. um,
So, well, in the interim, if anyone wants to look at the syllabus as it is so far, you can post it in the. Let's post it in the actual chat for this week, just so folks see it.
That'd be great. It's good to see everyone. It's been a second.
Yeah, it's like feels like it's.
My prediction is
Time
that
just
the annual
keeps warping and it's
Yeah.
very strange.
so I just pinged her. So her name is Amber Case, and she's an advisor to quite a few foundations. And today's topic is actually about like micropayments. So let's just wait a bit for our moderator to pop up. Meanwhile, we can just keep taking a look at the document on the public goods syllabus. I think there's so much to unpack here.
Can we?
Wait, is it Amber Case, the anthropologist?
I think so.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Based on the bio that we got.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know she's been like exploring Web3 a little bit, but
Oh,
I don't
interesting.
see-
Okay. So at Civic Media Group at MIT Media Lab,
yeah,
didn't really mention anything about anthropology, but yeah, we can probably ask her when she joins.
It's a cyborg anthropologist.
Wait, it's Amber Case, the cyborg anthropologist?
Yes.
Oh,
and we got Case.
That's such a
that's pretty
treat.
cool.
Wow, that's amazing.
Oh.
If it really
Hello.
is her.
Yeah, it is.
Hi,
That's
Amber.
what it is. I mean, that's
Hello.
what Lynn has in the description. So. Oh, there she is.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for coming. So welcome to the public library. I think everyone is very hyped up for you.
Yes. Very much so.
So today's session is going to be about micropayments and calm design. So this is really interesting because calm technology is something we haven't really touched at all in the public library. And today's question of the week is actually about when Web3 or as Web3 expands, how might we bring greater affordance to complex transactions, creator support, and DAOs with visible complexity? So you can find some of the readings inside the public library channel. But for now, Amber, please take it away.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Hooray. Oh, cool. More faces to see. My name is Amber Case. I grew up with blue-collar engineering parents. They helped put television on the air before they were automated by digital technology. And I grew up kind of half and half there. I got my degree in anthropology because while I grew up with a technical family, I didn't understand people. And I thought, I heard this story that at Xerox PARC, this person, Lucy Suchman, came in and realized that the engineers were so smart making amazing printer technology and copy machines, and yet all these copiers and printers in the 70s and 80s were stuffed into a corner. You had to be, if you operated them, you were definitely a woman because you had to be smart enough to deal with them. The problem with them is that As an engineer building something, the engineers wanted to be able to do anything. So the printer copy machine had like 30, 40 buttons where you could modify anything you wanted to do. So you became this superhuman with this machine. But Lucy Suchman realized, and this is a little bit of an anecdotal story, that most people just wanted to press the copy or the print button. And so she suggested putting a big green print and copy button on it. And that took care of a lot of the tasks. And then it was able to be moved into the office more centrally so that people could use it as part of their work instead of have it be their entire job. Now, this is the kind of environment that Calm Technology actually came out of. In the mid 90s, actually the early 90s, Mark Weiser, John Seeley Brown, Rich Gold, Natalie German-Jenko, who's an artist. There were these kind of philosophers working at Xerox PARC which was a place that people would take psychedelics and sit in beanbag chairs to talk about the future of technology. It had an early version of what we now know as the web. It was kind of its own internal intranet. There was a famous band that decided to be live streamed, the first live stream band ever. And Mark Weiser's band Severe Tire Damage decided they would open for the famous band, making them the first live stream band. There's a lot of pranks going on. I think the most important thing about Xerox PARC research was that it had a bunch of people from different backgrounds. There were a lot of people from history and humanities. It was a really interesting place to be. So when I wrote my thesis on cell phones in 2007, 2008, right when the iPhone came out, I discovered this. Oops, hold on. I need to plug in my computer. Speaking of technology. So when I wrote my thesis on cell phones, I discovered this paper called Calm Technology from, I think it was 1993. The paper said that at some point in the future, technology would become super cheap and our attention would become the most valuable. And how we worked with or broke that attention would work with or break the future of all the products that we made and the future of all that technology. And it's kind of silly, but when I saw the paper and I read it, it read just like today. It hasn't changed. It's kind of like technology universals and human universals. They don't really change. Although we think technology changes a lot, we end up building it in very similar ways. So I kind of cried because here was this very clear voice from the past, and nobody seemed to care about it. And so I started giving little talks on it. I remember the first time I gave a talk on Calm Technology, it was one of the worst rated talks at this conference in Norway because they said, well, we don't care about alerts. I think it was 2013. Like, you gave a talk about alerts and how we need less of them. That's a really boring topic. We wanted you to talk about cyborg anthropology. Why are you doing this? And a couple years later, it became a better talk, and I ended up writing a short book on it. And now the Calmtech framework has been used by Google and Microsoft and a major car company. There is a small group in Japan that wants to work with their parents' generation. They work in Kyoto, and they have worked with 800-year-old furniture manufacturing to blend kind of a smart piece of wood in your home with like a little bit of light up behind it to like have this little calm tech thing in your home. So that's now like 20 people. So some of the principles of calm technology are technology should be there when you need it, but not when you don't. It's not the idea that technology should be invisible because that's like one of those bad 1950s Monsanto smart home videos that just don't work and have like female voices telling you what to do all the time. Like those things creep me out. But like more like a light switch. You don't notice a light switch when you walk into a room, but you just kind of use it. And then even if you're like drunk home in 3 in the morning or in a new unfamiliar place, you can kind of tap the wall until you find the light switch. There's a kind of abstraction of the complexity of what's behind the scenes, and then you have this small choice. But even a 3-year-old can turn on a light switch. But we also understand that what's behind the light switch, that electricity, is really dangerous, and we respect it. And contractors and electrical engineers can open up the wall and see what's going on. And so this is kind of an important thing that's like, it's not dumbing things down, it's making an affordance. Kind of like things that we don't have anymore, like the foot pedal. Like we use a foot pedal in a car. It allows us not to look at our feet when we're driving, but allows yet another affordance. Same with that foot pedal on a sewing machine, on a trash can. Some people that are live streamers use a foot pedal. So that's kind of one of the principles. And that invisible technology, the quote from Mark Weiser was that a technology can be invisible only that you focus on the task and not the tool. So if we think of Google search, you don't focus on, I'm going to Google, you pass through it in order to get to the result. And the interface is actually quite invisible. The same with the light switch. You're focusing on turning on the light, not the light switch. Where things get complicated is when we try to make things smart, like a smart pet feeder called PetNet. They built this thing. They told you that you could feed your pets automatically on a feeding schedule, and then they managed the feeding schedule on a remote server. And when that remote server went down, thousands of pets were stranded, and their owners didn't know whether the pets would survive or not, and when the server would be turned back on. And because it was managed like a regular Web 2.0 product, nobody was responsible if a pet died. In the terms of service, it says you do not rely on PetNet for anything related to the well-being of your pet, even though on the front of the box, so to speak, they said, don't worry about it. Now, this is kind of where I would say kind of some of the blue collar technology building has to come in. Like if there were any typical redundancies in that, we would have had, something really nice. And then there's also the tendency to make everything smart and to build all these smart homes. I'm kind of the annoying person that gets invited into all these smart home places and I break them within like 20 seconds. There are so many things that people don't think through. So when we try to look at like home technology, there's like 8 full principles. I'm not going to do the full presentation, but and we try to apply that, to Web3. It's like, how do you give people certainty about their transaction and status while they're pushing something through? I've been really a fan of the Cosmos ecosystem recently, just because of how smooth and fun everything is. It like feels more like a playground than some of the changes to, say, Ethereum, where it's like sometimes you have to like guess at the amount of gas. Even some of the new systems that are coming up, like they'll let you choose your gas. We're all used to the idea of gas. I've been having fun just introducing people into different systems and being like, what's the gas for? What does this mean? What are we doing? And I guess the last little part that I'll talk about is the idea of micropayments. I was a Mozilla fellow for the last year working on micropayments, and one of the ideas behind that was from Ted Nelson in 1960. He said that you could kind of, if you were a creator, you could chop up all the things that you did, and then if other people used them, there would automatically be stored somewhere, let's say on a blockchain or in IPFS, but this was the 1960s, and you would be able to get micropayments, smooth micropayments based on what that was. Now, one of the issues that prevented that from happening is that when the web first came out, we had those little error codes, right? Like 404 now it found. But one of the error codes that we forgot about was 402, payment required. Prior to that launch of the web, we actually had this thing called NSFNet, which was like science web. It was definitely not commercial. People building the web early on were from universities and colleges, and they were not thinking about buying and selling things online. So that 402 payment required error code, actually it said it's reserved for future use, because it hadn't been built yet. Because we didn't have the payment protocol, unlike IMAP, SMTP, POP, protocols for email, we didn't have a payment protocol. So we ended up making things like PayPal and Venmo and all these kind of third-party things that are based on fiat and credit cards. So there's a couple different protocols that have come out for money. One of them is Interledger, which allows you to have seamless payments. It was supposed to replace like Swift if you ever have to do those kind of wire transfers. There's another one called Unlock Protocol, which I'm an advisor at, which you can just buy stuff directly from the website. Everything's kind of a mess, and we're still kind of in a period where the user experience is still run by engineers, but not necessarily like there's not enough, let's say, like anthropologists in there, but we're getting somewhere, and this is kind of this missing piece. And now we can look back at all the micropayments type stuff and say, let's stream payments in a way that's not like Spotify, where it's just not very many payments. There's also been this thing called Grant for the Web, which is $100 million that goes to people that are doing creative work. I'm about to publish a piece where I interviewed most of the creators and how they use micropayments. And the surprise is that, well, micropayments end up being about 27 cents an hour if you're not running a video game online, and you have to have somebody have the creator has to have a weird web wallet that supports Interledger, and the browser has to pay $5 a month and have a browser plugin. So like still there's an extra amount, and kind of non-standard. It's not like using MetaMask or Rainbow Wallet. So I've been studying kind of that sort of thing. I think I've talked a little bit too long on a couple of these concepts. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I know that people were talking about something when I came in, so I'm happy to talk about that too. So yeah, a little bit of background on me and what I'm interested in right now.
That's extremely cool. All that is extremely cool. I'll let someone else, yeah, jump in as well. But maybe one very quick question is just like, when you think of, obviously the stuff you're working on in the context of Mozilla and the Interledger stuff is really interesting to you. Like, what else have you found in terms of use cases, like in terms of payments on the web, like whether on Ethereum, a lot of people are talking about, obviously NFTs and so forth, DAOs and all these different things. Is there anything in particular that really stands out to you as, the future TM, or are you finding that right now, like a lot of it is still in that state where it's a bit too early?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think about the future as kind of signals, not trends. So whenever I see people playing, that's a signal for the future. So the fact that a lot of people are playing with NFTs right now, I have this great graphic that involves Pokemon, which I can't share, but the idea is that like NFTs are the initial playground for like art, and you're experimenting with the smart contract itself. So anybody who experiments or makes fun of the smart contract, like Bored Ape Yacht Club making fun of something, or like PAX merge, like doing something new, or secret punks on the secret network. Anybody who's doing that is kind of the equivalent to like in the 30s when somebody took a canvas and they just like slashed it in the middle. They're like, well, let's play with the materiality of canvas and how people have treated it as a flat two-dimensional surface. We're going to make it 2.3 dimensions and then put it on a wall, like that sort of. But then it's funny and accessible, and I guarantee you, it's kind of in the stage like when the iPhone came out and they showed that you could have like the fart app that you could press a button and make a fart sound. I guarantee you that like every 13-year-old that saw that who was in any way into technology said, "Oh, how do I make that?" And it was like 4 lines of code and some like weird tonsils from Objective-C that you had to put in there, and then like a 4-hour submission process to get it on the store, which was the annoying part. But the people that I know who were inspired by that push a button and hook it up to a thing, like this liquid interface that allowed you to push a button and make a sound and kind of absorb in this previous functionality of a different generation, a different materiality, like that was so cool. And that birthed a bunch of new people, kind of like Neopets birthed a bunch of people to learn CSS and HTML just because they wanted cute pages. So when I see NFTs, I see a whole generation of people saying, "Whoa, how do you build that?" Oh, it's a really good way to get people to download a web wallet, and but it's not the end game for NFTs. So it's like it's the signal, the play is the signal that this is interesting, and the next generations of it are NFTs as memberships, as we're already seeing. What does it mean when you hold an NFT in your wallet? Well, isn't that like just having a QR code that you show at a show to get in? Huh, interesting. Except it's like a verified thing. And then what once you have the NFT for membership, then you're kind of part of a DAO that oh, well, governance becomes interesting. Oh, voting becomes interesting. Well, what about quadratic voting? What about fairness? What about fair drops? Like, and then you have like the third generation of NFTs, which are I own my own healthcare data. I bring that to the medical professional or the grad student who's built the genetic analyst tool, and it's stored with them for 2 hours in order to make modifications, and then they make the modification to my file, and it gets sent back to me. And then there's a record that I interacted with that. My data, if it goes away to something else, is also tracked. So, I imagine like having a forum or a Discord channel where you're dealing with something like MS, and only people with MS are allowed into the channel. So you can't have all these advertisers come in and try to advertise to them. Secrecy and privacy is something that I'm seeing more and more of. It's a double-edged sword. One, some of the larger family funds do not want to show how much money they have and they want a private blockchain. But I also don't think that we're going to have just public blockchains. We'll have private chains and public chains. Maybe if it's like a record of like home ownership, let's say your DAO buys a home and like makes a huge poverty alleviation scheme, and you buy a network of like lots of homes and do rent control for people and then give the people in those homes ownership of those homes. Like maybe you don't want to have that be necessarily public. Not sure. So that kind of third generation where you go from like NFTs as pictures that are cute and that inspire people and infuriate them to authentication to like to kind of identity. It's like replacing OAuth in a way. You're logging in with your NFT. Your NFT has encoded data. Your NFT is you. But just like you aren't the same person in each social group, you don't have to present the same face in every place. I imagine people having lots of different wallets and different playgrounds to play in. So I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing. Another thing, I'm a late early adopter, so I always join like the third generation of something. Well, just kind of first I like kind of ignore, like I had a Bitcoin wallet in like 2009 because somebody came over to my house and was like, "Hey, you should check this out. You have a lot of graphics cards." I used to do the Mersenne Prime, um, like like you would factor like complex numbers and try to figure out if they were prime numbers, and if you did, you'd win $100,000. And I really wanted to go to MIT, so I would like buy old computers literally from a shop in Cheyenne, Wyoming called Tatooine Computers, and I would put them in my basement and like factor these prime numbers or try to figure out if one was prime to get this money. So it was already like mining primes. But hilariously, because I had met so many kind of like crypto libertarians and people wanting to do city coins already in like 2006, by the time I moved to Portland, Oregon, I was like, oh, this is really annoying. I mean, I like read the white paper, like I was doing elliptic curve cryptography. Like for some reason, I just said I was doing a startup. I didn't want to go to jail. So I had this nice Bitcoin wallet with no Bitcoin in it. And then waited as like friends of mine worked on core Bitcoin wallets. Like a friend of mine did the whole IPFS storage system. And after a while, I started to become really negative towards it. I was like, why are all these smart people doing this dumb thing? And meanwhile, I was starting this thing called Indie Web movement, which was all about decentralization. I thought this should be like a decentralized WordPress that you should post on your own site and then syndicate elsewhere. I was talking about Calm technology, and then the pandemic hit, and I went on a little road trip with my friend. We did some photography, and then I said, "Hey, you should tell me about this stuff. Here's some mushrooms. We're gonna take mushrooms. Like I just don't get it. Let me just take this substance, and then my brain will be open. Like I need to take my ego out of this, take my judgment out." And he explained what he was doing for Mozilla, which was working on micropayments. This was like, and I was like, oh no, why did I not understand any of this? I was even working for like a crypto analyst company at the time too, like helping them with user experience, like complete, like seeing what was going on, getting all, our calls were very silly, and it was all these British guys that we were just having a great time. And after that, I realized that, there's not a really great way to get compensated as a creator online. if you're on the Ethereum network, paying the gas fee is really expensive. Micropayments are one way to do it. There's a couple other ways to do it. We just, we don't have the kind of pattern library of tools, especially since, if you're giving money to like low income groups, it's not just, oh, here you go, here's free micropayments and like here's some tokens. Like, wait, you need a stable place to be on your laptop. You don't have a laptop. You need to be able to deal with like earlier stuff. There's not a lot of really good ways to make mobile websites, even though we're mobile first. There are a lot of missing building blocks and pieces that we could actually build. We could have like a little pattern library of stuff that would like help creators monetize and teach them. But it's, the last time I saw a really cute version of that was probably like the heyday of Yahoo with Yahoo's pattern library in 2006, with like the carousel and like all of these like silly things. So it's been interesting because when I finally kind of figured it out for myself and dropped my preconceived notions about the world, I got really involved and found myself working on a bunch of different projects and immediately wrote a huge article on Medium that said the missing middle of like web compensation. Either you can buy something for a lot of money on one side, or you can have something be free, or you can have like a payment subscription model, but there's nothing in the middle. So that missing middle of web payments, like how would you be able to do that? That article did really well, and then I got the Mozilla Fellowship out of it. So it was really good. Now I feel like my attention's a little bit shot because I've been looking at different projects. I think one of my favorite projects, still to answer your question about like what's the future, when I saw the Constitution DAO project, I was super amused because here's a DAO that wants to buy the Constitution, and I bought in because I said it's not that I'm buying in because I believe in the project or not. It's that I like when people are doing something weird that I haven't seen before, and I would like to be a part of whatever this thing is. And that ended up being the right idea. So like it failed and they were funding everybody's money, but if you paid, $200 worth, your gas fee would eat all of the money. And it was really demoralizing. So I swapped it out for this thing called People Token, and then People Token mooned, and then I was like, oh, and I was able to kind of swap that in and like, quietly give it to some musicians that I liked. But it was kind of a cool thing where it's like, like I think the last thing is like people are really annoyed about like proof of work being really bad on the environment. I think there's a couple arguments for that. One is that a lot of these big crypto mining farms have to use renewables, and actually renewable energy is really expensive right now, but not if you're mining crypto. And so they're like the first kind of people to come in and kind of till that earth for the next generation of public utilities to come in and buy the renewable energy. Aside from that, some of these ecosystems that are proof of stake, like I'm having a really good time with them. But some of my friends and I came up with this idea that I have a friend who does a nonprofit called Amber Initiative, and she's an ecological architect that used to work at Consensus. So she has like blockchain and architecture. So she's really involved in a lot of indigenous communities and like floating oyster research labs in Hong Kong, which is like which oysters filter out pollution in the bay better. Let's fund that, but we're going to have indigenous people run it. Okay, great. So I said, well, what if we had this validator and some of the validator profits, a third of them, not like 1% of them. What of the validator profits people can ape into the system? Great. But then we're going to shove them over into this nonprofit. And then it's going to directly go to these communities. It's not going to go to the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation where the CEO makes $2 million a year. It's going to go directly to people. So we ended up building this little tiny thing for the Juno ecosystem and the Stargaze ecosystem within Cosmos. And I like that kind of thing. Like I've heard a couple stories recently of people that said, carbon credits, let's make a DAO that buys up the cheapest carbon credits and then sell, and then all the people that are forced to buy carbon credits as airline companies, they can only buy middle grade carbon credits. Like making these kind of equations that force people to invest into nature. Like I'm really interested in the idea of being able to bank with a tree, to say that like a tree is more valuable, a forest is more valuable when it's in the ground as an ecological state than it is like as a piece of lined ruled paper in your third grade math class, and like what that means. But there's been no way to like validate that or quantify that, and people love quantified things and people love investing in quantified things. But to be able to like bank with an ecosystem or bank with a tree kind of sounds a little silly, but I'm really interested in hanging out with people that work towards that, because that's kind of what we have, when we're inside ignoring everything. A lot of the people that I work with, like if we're working together, we're going to be outside a lot to remember, and our decisions are more clear once we come back inside. You can sit there in like a little room with no window and wax philosophically about the world, but what if you went outside and saw how a tree did it? Oh, that's a way better way to build the software. Look how that tree solved that problem. Wow, that tree is really smart about it. There's a lot of Taoism. There's a little group within Cosmos called Dao. It's a Dao of Daos. Yes, mushrooms. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's.
I wanted to just also say here, so I studied anthropology. You're an anthropologist. I studied anthropology when I was in college as well. And then one of the things that I was like really interested in was the economization of resources. And it's very serendipitous that I happen to be reading this book right now, because that's one of the things that's talked about in there is this notion of salvage, right? Like the idea, the liminal space between when something goes from a resource or just like a non-commoditized good into being a commoditized good. And so I think there's something really, really strong to say there about like banking with the tree, right? Like, what are you saying? Like, oh, how we want to carefully quantify the value of natural resources. This is something that like even when I was in college, was like people have been talking about this in anthropology for a while. Like, how do you carefully represent the needs of the communities that utilize a resource in a way that is not necessarily extractive and has more charismatic qualities to it, while still being able to make the argument to the people who have the money at the end of the day, who are going to go in and clear cut the forest because it has economic value, right? Like a good example of that comes to mind is like the Klamath, the uh, Klamath tribe in the Cascades, and how it is that in the Cascades, like the Klamath, we're actually doing very well with their own form of forestry. And then essentially in like 1956, the U.S. Forestry Service came in and said, you know what, we're just gonna take this from you because it's useful as a resource for private loggers, and you're kind of making too much money. And so I think there's something really interesting here to talk about, especially like with reference to what you mentioned about taking a validator and making them essentially take a portion of staking profits and create a flywheel effect for demonstrating value in other forms of resource. And I mean, there's something to be said. I think this book is extremely prescient, as an example, for trying to use the notion of salvage as a translation layer for things that don't have necessarily inherent economic value in how we traditionally value them. So, banking with the tree, banking with the forest, banking with ecosystems. What does it look like for us to think about the value of ecosystems as something that we can um, bank with, right? Like it's probably the most valuable thing if we were to economize it.
Yeah, the if I was hanging out with my friend Hansel, and we're like, what if we were to value a mountain? How much would that be if you were to buy one? Like, let's say it would be a project where you're gonna build a mountain, you're gonna import all the trees, all the species, grow them in a lab, and then we're gonna grow all that rock and we're gonna like put it there. And we're like, it's like, well, you could build one of those cool buildings in Dubai. That's not a mountain. And we're like, if we're gonna do this from scratch within one generation, it would cost like $250,000,000. Like we're just like actually adding up all of the little pieces. We're like, and what that means. And nobody's, because we don't think about that, like, whoa, what a nice mountain. It's like, have you valued that like you valued your armchair condo investment yet? because if you didn't, it's insane, and I think there's just some really other cool kind of equations that I've been seeing. Like, for instance, I know somebody who lives on a beautiful lake in Montana, and the prettiest part of the lake is managed by the indigenous community. But it's been proven that indigenous groups and everybody does. Yeah. Okay.
I'm from Flathead Lake.
I know it's Flathead Lake. It's great. Okay, so imagine, so there's all these rich people coming in, moving around the lake with $1 million homes, right? Um, and imagine if that same indigenous community who's not living in specifically great places could be part of that upside because they help make that beauty, and that people coming in, there's just like there's ways that could be done, and that we could realize that people who are stewards of this are the OG amazing people. It's like I see people aping into like dog coins. It's like, well, can you ape into nature in the same way? And can you imagine people just like hoarding environmental restoration tokens because they're afraid that they're going to go up, or like and so a lot of it's not even my friend does not take the tokens and turn them into cash. She just shows people how to do DeFi. Like, she shows like indigenous tribes how to do DeFi.
Fantastic.
And it's like,
If you don't mind me, I want to see if I can maybe get some input from some other people about like these observations here. So kind of looks like Eddie, you've been off mic for a while, and then maybe Cult Leader as well, if you have some insights.
So
Yeah. Go ahead, call leader.
I've been like over here, like thinking. So many things to be thought. One thing I want to say, and this is something I've been like really, 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 really talking about on Twitter, but has been really capitalizing on my like intellectual space, is like, again, I think we need to, and in crypto, in Web3, we need to contend with the reality of like the cultural, environmental, and social destruction that colonialism wrought. Like, we have to talk about it. Because these things were like, a lot of them were like European exports, no tea, no shade, right? And like, we have to contend with this. Like, we have to be honest that like a lot of this stuff was like understood for a lot of human history. And only in the past few hundred years did we start like financializing everything. And that was as a tool of like the colonizer, right? The Europeans came and didn't understand how valuable the land they sat on was. Not only the land of the indigenous people they came to, but their own land that they lay on, right? So it was like a cultural misunderstanding from the European culture, right? That was then translated globally. So like when you talk about like Case, when you talk about this, like how much is the value worth, it reminds me, and I've been talking about this book all the time, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And like, indigenous people, like at least in the Americas, which is my reference point, which is kind of the land I live on, like they would thank the nature. They would say like, thank you, mountain, right? Thank you, stream, right? Living in gratitude and like living in like loving reciprocity with the land. And the value system was, this land we live on is important, right? These public goods are important. And that's why, like in the conversation we had earlier before this, I was like, we can't just ignore indigeneity. We can't just ignore, right, these beliefs and cultures and understandings, and not as a fetishization of them, but a reverence and saying, let me step back and learn and understand what I was robbed of, right? Or let me learn from a more advanced culture and society that was able to live with land and preserve it for thousands of years, right? And in the course of like, European colonization, we've destroyed the earth in a few generations. So like that is something we need to contend. Like, I just like in Web3 I'm banging my head because blockchain is like indigeneity 101, right? It feels like Giga Chad's coming to Jesus about how do we actually care about each other, right? How do we actually value each other? And like the thing about the calm thing, right? It's like the calm thing is like, oh well, how do we create systems that cool our nervous system, that love and care about us, not extract from us, right? So like this, like in my mind, the central piece of all of this is like white supremacy, colonization, like those are the central theses I have of like what we need to address before we can actually make something that changes the world, right? If we don't understand like the history we're coming from, we cannot move forward. And that's why like I bring up all these random things that might seem random to people, but I'm like, it's so interconnected that we have to address the harm and like then move together into the future of like how do we like save this planet and save each other and care about each other. So it's like I'm ranting. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yay. Um, yeah, I have so much to say about that. I've been digging really deeply into that. The first thing I did, which was very silly, is I did like my ancestry, and I was like, okay, so I thought I was all these little things. It's like, no, no, I'm one of the whitest people you're ever gonna meet. I have the same last name going back 1,000 years. Okay, so what did my family do? No, I went over to Norway and I was asking, I was just like, what is going on? Like, why did all these weird Anglo-Saxon people come down? Like, what was going on? And there was a joke in Norway that I was told. I said, there are a bunch of Norwegians that are like kind of quiet, very, very like kind of dark humor, prone to depression and kind of there's like a bad name for them, like the soft Norwegians, and then there were like the hard angry Norwegians, and they were pissed off and there was a fight and a bunch of them left and they couldn't handle their emotions. They didn't say they were sorry, and then they migrated down, and then like all sorts of bad stuff happened, and then they did that, and then eventually that became England, and then they got mad. Part of them got mad, and they couldn't handle their emotions, so they came to the United States and started the 13 colonies, and then some of those people got mad, and they went over and they created Salt Lake City, Utah, and created Mormonism, and then some of those people got mad. And then at each time, so I studied a lot of British history in college because I had a crush on the professor, but it turned out to be very helpful because just learning like the little tactics. It's like, oh, so if you're English, you're going to colonize Scotland and Ireland, then you're going to use the Scottish people to fight to emerge the territory of the Irish because they're savages. You're going to use specific terms to take away people's identity in order to colonize them. And you don't hear about the Welsh because the Welsh were like, sure, you can colonize us. What do you want us to do? Well, we've lived next to you for a while. Should we do something cool? And they're like, no, you can keep your language and your architecture and your religion. Oh, okay, cool. Well, thanks. Well, we're colonized. Thanks, guys. Like just like the different ways that people did it. And then the English did that in India, and they forced India and Pakistan to like be changed, right? So it was kind of interesting thing. The thing that I've been really studying deeply is like, why did this group of people be so unsettled? Couldn't they just say they were sorry to the quiet Norwegians, and did they have to move? Why were they so mad about the land? Why were they so itchy about things? Why did they have to keep colonizing? Why do they have to keep inventing things? And I know that I'm kind of flattening this history really hard for effect, but it's mostly that most of American culture is built on supernormal stimuli, which is like really bright reds and yellows and like bright colors, and like make sure you don't have enough so that like here's a large portion, and if you look at like ancient China, there's like a little book that's like, if you want to control a population, divide them into different pieces and feed them certain things that slow them down, like potatoes and corn, and high fructose corn syrup. So we've been kind of divided and conquered. Now we're in the process of colonizing ourselves constantly every day. Our amygdalas are the size of Mars. They're firing all the time. We're in a constant state of fear and not enough-ness. And this makes sure that we cannot remember that nature provides everything for us. And I think that, from it's like we then to say that the indigenous perspective is like there's a bunch of different things. They're all based on ecologies. They're all based on specific land, and that creates your tools, that creates your culture, that creates your interaction between people. It's totally wildly different, your language, everything. But it becomes really interesting when we think about it's like I don't consider myself a gender. I consider myself a citizen of the nature. There's a really long word for it that I've yet to memorize. But this word is more about indigenous people do not think of themselves as like, oh, I'm protecting nature. It's like, no, nature is me. I'm nature. There's no difference. again, bringing up mushrooms is like one of the things that happens on a mushroom trip is like, oh, there's no difference between me and the other person. We're all just temporary extruded consciousnesses. And when you see a large concert or you hear low frequency, bass or something like that, like, everybody's consciousness goes whoop and becomes one. So it's a kind of interesting thing. It's like, well, can we remember that ourselves? And it's not like, how do you have white people remember that without it turning into yoga and like Lululemon athletic leisure clothing, right? Because that's what happens. It's, well, we really want to get into this thing. Wow, I had this really great experience. Well, now let me piece this up and sell it to somebody else and like do this therapy. Oh, I've been healed as a trust fund kid, and therefore I'm going to heal other trust fund kids because my trust fund is running out, right? Like, I'm being really mean. I apologize if you have a trust fund. Like, I do understand your trauma. Like, it is traumatizing, but like, it's more like, and I've been going to these powwows in the Pacific Northwest, and playing music. And the music that I play is about the experience of somebody who's grown up with the land entering a fluorescent lined supermarket and seeing all the packages of food that aren't necessary to human survival. Like, it's that discomfortable moment of knowing that it is very unnatural to have that, right? But it's not about having the indigenous community that I'm playing for understand that, because they deeply know that. It's about the audience being able to take enough time with themselves. It uses like a lot of like low frequency tones to remember something or to see something from a perspective outside of the kind of infrastructure that they've been built into. So I feel like if we can kind of knock people's consciousness just a little, to say, and I think that's why I'm really excited about Web3, because like you can't go at it from the scarcity resource world of Web 2.0 and the kind of I think that the Web 2.0 world is very egocentric. Here's your template itself on Facebook. You can craft yourself in only these ways in the text boxes that we allow you. Versus kind of the Web 1.0, which was like kind of pure play, where you're like, blah, let's see what happens. So I think there's opportunities here by looking at it from different perspectives. Like, one of the conferences that I'm looking to run is called The Future of Water, but I don't want it to be a scary conference. I want it to be kind of goofy, because it's really easy to just get demoralized. Like, I went to Antarctica a couple years ago and came back with like severe depression for 3 months because I was there with a climate scientist, and I was like, ah. But with The Future of Water, I like to ask people like, what's the thing in your house that uses the most water? And most people are like, it's the sink, it's the shower, it's the bathtub, it's the toilet. And it's actually your clothing closet. Clothes are the second largest use of water in the world, fast fashion. The amount of water that it takes to produce it, to grow the cotton or the oil-based polyester to make these clothes and then ship them to you, just the process itself takes up more water. And this is really interesting. So it's like, I think one thing that we can learn is to see through like a political statement, to have the kind of aesthetics that politicians had as upper class people that grew up with it, watching their dad sling political slogans on a golf course at the age of 3 and managing a stock portfolio. Like, if we can understand some of those pieces, some of the like weapons that the upper class has, so to speak, then we can start to like see through them and kind of craft our own, right? We can use the same tools, but we can also like help people understand that it's okay to be fearful and it's okay to be anxious avoidant. It's almost like the entire United States and a lot of white culture is anxious and avoidant as a point. If you don't like what's happening and you don't like this thing, you can buy this thing. You can involve in this sort of thing. And there's a really interesting book that came out called Cosmotechnics, which I encourage you to read. Just like even a couple paragraphs. The scholar is really interested in like Greek thought, and then also like Eastern thought, like Confucianism and Taoism and things like that, and does a cross comparison analysis of this in this very sharp, beautiful way from an art history perspective. Anyway, it's very complex, but the whole point of cosmotechnics is that every culture has their own technology. Yet today, the dominant cosmotechnics is Silicon Valley. It doesn't mean it's the correct one. But when I go to Japan every year, I see more and more of Silicon Valley style cosmotechnics in Japan, whereas early on they married their own indigenous technology alongside modernism. That's where you get like, oh, you have a sliding door? Well, now you have an automatic sliding door. Like, it's like at the silliest point, but then you also have like the idea of, tea rooms and like calmness and it's nature alongside humans. And then that evolved into technology alongside humans. That I think this big issue that we've had is that, our tools are using us and producing us. But the whole point of tools was always to be a pass through. If you're a blacksmith, like you're using your tools, you're passing through them, your tools inform you and shape you. But when we're used by our tools and it's just another like kind of factory labor, the internet as playground and factory. We're playing on Facebook, but we're actually laboring on Facebook as part-time Facebook employees every time we use it.
Right.
How do we not? Anyway.
No, I just wanted to say that this is something we've discussed in this group a number of times before, as well as this, and I'm developing in my way of thinking about like kind of a framework of defining the difference between a tool and an institution. Like when does a tool become an institution? Sort of, it's like when a tool becomes something that we work for, it becomes an institution. And so, for example, Facebook is supposed to be a tool for connecting people, but then it became an institution that uses people to make a profit. Religion is supposed to be something that gives people hope. It's supposed to be a tool for dealing with reality, but then eventually it starts self-preserving and self-perpetuating, right? And so I think what you're trying to itch toward, and I think this is something that has been discussed a lot in the Web3 space as well, is how do we return to making our tools work for us instead of the tools asking us to work for them, right? Like, how do we make sure that these financial implements that we're utilizing are advantaging us rather than us advantaging the continued propagation of a particular chain? And so, like, I'm always curious about this because this is like really the defining line as well as like, you have a public good. Like when is a public good something that serves people or an institution? Is
Yes.
is the if, for example, is the modern National Park Service, is that a public good or is it an institution? I would argue it's an institution. Um, it's a way to advertise America to the rest of the world. It's a way to advertise the notion of free nature as a thing that people should value to the people. Um, but I mean, and it has like obviously some public goods aspects to it. But yeah, I think the thing we're trying to return to is this idea that technology can be something that we utilize, not something that utilizes us. And as Cult Leader mentioned earlier, it's I think we have kind of forgotten a lot of the fact that this stuff's only been happening for a couple hundred years. Like we have only been used by our technology to the degree that we do in terms of like the frameworks of capitalism for like a couple hundred years.
Mm,
Seem like you're disagreeing.
yeah, I would say since 323 AD, since since
Well, but
Christianity.
in terms of the exponent, right? Like
Oh,
so,
since the exponent, yeah, since the Industrial Revolution, yeah. I feel like the first like, oh, sorry.
that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like the first big exponential thing was like Alexander the Great's world oikoumene. He was taught by his teacher Aristotle that you could colonize the world as long as you make them all the same. So let's get them all in the same philosophy. And then the world oikoumene means the open doors, the world open doors. So when Mark Zuckerberg studied all of the ancient Greek history, he's like, "Oh, cool! Check this out, World Oikoumene. We'll just make everyone have the same, Facebook profile. Bam! We got the World Oikoumene and like the new Alexander the Great." It's very silly, but like, I love the idea of like, it's not necessarily that we use our tools or our tools use us, but I like the idea of like introducing a word like alongside. Like, can we work alongside our tools? Because we did when we till the land, when we gather berries, when we work with animals, we're working alongside. My mom's cousin has this ranch, and he works alongside his animals, and he survives entirely with his animals. His animals survive with him. He survives with his animals. He knows each of his cattle by name, and they come when he calls them. And he has to make sure, like, he's in this living this living system. So I love this idea. It's something that, it's very Marshall McLuhan as well. But I think maybe there's this other wound that happened where you had a bunch of people worshiping the sun, as pagans in almost every culture worship the sun. The sun rises, the sun sets. In Egypt, the god was Set, the sun set. And then you have during the winter solstice, there's like the sun goes into like a cross formation and then dies on the cross for a day and then like resurrects 3 days later. And then that got appropriated by Christianity, and they turned the like 12 constellations that the sun goes through the year into the 12 disciples of Christ. And then we got this like modernist Christianity thing. Super clever, like really great PR campaign that they did. Very successful, viral cultural load on that. But it was also like a lot of the people that got their paganism taken away, and it turned into this evil dark forest thing, and then we had Puritanism. They forgot, like, they're so far removed from being part of a nature culture. And then there's other groups of people that are less far away from being a nature culture, and it's like, how do you get people to remember something that happened in 300 AD? How do you get them to come back to that spot? Because we're all going to have to, not in one way, in like thousands and millions of different ways, because we have thousands and millions of different ecologies. But it's kind of this ancient memory that like everybody needs to come back to.
Eddie, did you have something you wanted to bring in?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just had one thought that so I've been in touch with David Ronfeld, who was the OG on tribes, institutions, markets, and networks. So I tried to explain to him the concept of DAO and the cryptocurrency stuff, and he had this one very big concern that I've not been able to shrug off, and that is what we are trying to quantify. We're trying to give value to nature, to things, right? We're trying to in essence put a dollar value to some of that, even though we don't intend to, but we have to. So I'm just very torn between this tension that, are we just like re-commodifying everything and like creating a new super cycle of capitalism again? I guess this is a question I suppose people have thought about before, but I just wanted to get quick views if it's even possible. Yeah.
Yes. This is a question I think about every day. And this kind of goes back to, I know you were talking about this when I jumped in, but the thing that really got me into this world was the idea of cyborg anthropology, which is a subsection of the anthropology of science. It's about like actors and networks and science networks, and there's indigenous tribes that like put fractals into their hair and into their own like cities. Like there's just like the cyborg handbook is this like dense chunk of awesomeness that's very cosmotechnic. It's got all these different things. But I was thinking about that because one of the really interesting papers that came out of that was called the Cyborg Manifesto by Donna Haraway, who's an ecologist, zoologist, and she's very snarky. So she decided she would publish this paper in the Socialist Review of Feminism. And she would tell the socialist feminists that she said, I'd rather be a cyborg than a goddess. And had little quotes in there like, the best machines are made of sunshine. They are all light, that like, we already have these machines. We already have like, we already have whatever we're going to call it. But to recognize that and to say, that the whole Cyborg Manifesto is like, how do you just say like, it is what it is. It is all trying to, like when you think about, like I'm the type of person that read all of Das Kapital from Marx in college because I wanted to know like what he really meant versus Engels coming in and like chopping it up and making it this like little viral media thing. But at the end of Das Kapital, he says, do not force communism, please. It will result in tragedy. But it's a natural state that happens after all the resources have been deprived and people must collaborate with each other. And we're seeing this, I'm trying to find instead of being demoralized, I'm trying to find the signals, not the trends of where this is happening. And I'm seeing it very small I'm seeing it in IKEA, where IKEA now owns and manages 1% of the world's forests because they have to, because if they keep tearing down the forest, they won't have enough forest left. So they have to manage and steward the forests, or they don't have a company anymore. So there's a couple interesting like little equations that I think are playing out. I wanted to write a counterpoint to Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto because she did publish it as a joke. She reappropriated the term cyborg, which is a military industrial term from 1960, meaning any organism that puts on external components to adapt to a new environment. She said, well, I'll reappropriate that for socialist feminists and then write this thing. I'm going to use their language and I'm going to make this prank. And the prank turned out to be very successful. And people started to understand, like, whoa, what if my body were made up of something else? How could I perform? Like, what if I'm stuck in this embodied situation where, like, I'm defined by my gender or my race, but I could be this other entity, and like make my own world. So the opposite of that would be finding the most conservative Republican old school document and then writing basically like a case for nature, as you could invest with nature and it will do really well. But using all of the language, because I'm quietly talking with various global companies. I'm saying, do you have a nature perspective? And they say, yeah, actually, we have to do this. But we have to write off our 20 years of this oil rig first. Like we can't all just buy renewables right now. Like like they're kind of trapped in these like giant family companies. And I want there to be a better answer. But I feel like there's different routes and like different ways we can think about it that are, I guess, less what we would see on TV and more like kind of original.
Yeah,
And that,
one
yeah.
thing. Sorry, I wasn't sure. Are we stopping or what's happening?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I've been talking too much. I do this if I'm tired and I wake up too early. So
No, I was just wondering because I'm down to keep talking. Like I'm just doing community manager stuff so I can do it while we're chatting. And I think this is an important conversation. One thing I wanted to add to your point about like narrative building, because that's been a key part of my like ethos for a while now, is that like I have been starting to understand. Like I've been taking a lot of like knowledge from white supremacy and colonization because even though it was really shitty, it was very successful, right? And I like have been trying to say like, what does success mean, right? And that's been very hard. It's been very emotionally hard to look at these things that hate me and say, what can I learn from you to liberate myself? Because I have this mentality that liberation is hidden by the oppressor, right? It's hidden potentially in plain sight. It's hidden where you want to turn away from most, right? It's hidden there. And so what I've been learning is that what white supremacy did very well was tell a story. Whether it was a true story or not was not important, but it was a story that converted people to a different headspace. And for me, I am like, what story do I need to tell? Whether it's historically accurate or not, whether it's true or not, and homage to my cult leader username, right? What story do I need to tell that builds a different world? So like it's interesting in a lot of conversations in like the discourse I've been like propagating is I'm like, I don't care if it's historically accurate, if it's true. What I care about is that it changes people to a good end, right? That it converts people to a beautiful worldview. And for me, that's been Web3. Web3's inspired me, right, to cultivate a narrative that says, we can do this together, right? Cultivate a narrative that says, actually, like white supremacy and colonialization hurt us all. Whether it's true or not. And it, decidedly for some folks, it's definitely not true. White supremacy did help people, right? White people. So like, that's kind of what I've been thinking a lot about. And like a lot of what you're saying, Case, is it's like ringing true to like, what story do we need to create in Web3, right? What story, what culture are we creating here that tells and informs people what they should believe about the future? So I think we have like responsibility and a chance here to make like ingrained into Web3 a new like headspace and mind think that can change people to the kind of ends of supporting our global society.
Yeah. That's why I like all of the pranks too. When people are making pranks, that's powerful. That's more powerful because the thing is, and then just one word, like the idea of a savage, that is such a strong word. Like, think about how powerful that is. That's more powerful than Coca-Cola as a brand to justify taking people's land and stuff. It and all of their things. It just looking at some of those phrases, like, well, we can retake back those, we can reappropriate them for sure. And when you do that, you end up like taking back that sovereignty, and being like, oh, we own this word. It's like National Geographic, don't come in and like take photos of tribes and we think of them as quaint. I would like to look at pictures of different tribes and say, whoa, these are the biggest badasses. They're the wealthiest people in the world, and they're the smartest people in history because they have what, 5 to 2 million years of history on each of them and understanding the land and tools and being part of it. Yeah, that's the smartest people. I have nothing on that. I have 1,000 years of people being upset and leaving and being anxious avoidant. Not very smart, So yeah, I don't want to take up too much more of everybody's time, but I'm so excited that you all exist, and I'm sorry for being so disjointed. There's a lot of stuff that I don't write about, and I have very formal like things since 2007 that like little frameworks and things where I try to kind of make Trojan horses to get into companies. For a long time, my like personal presence would be like I would go to speak with the most conservative people and kind of debarb them from understanding some of these things, and you can't go in with hate and you can't go in with overt love either because they're terrified and anxious avoidant. So you kind of have to come in from the side, tell them you speak their language, and then kind of like poke at them a little bit and then make sure that it's safe and then like they can come in. But they definitely like the words that they've been trained to hate are like love and togetherness. And there's also like if we get rid of a lot of those what are they called, cliches, like if you speak in original prose without cliches, you have the ability to help people see something from a new perspective. But if we say like things like love and togetherness and we all need to be at the same table, like you can't fit everybody at the same table. Like we shouldn't like you mean we need to eat together? It's like, wait, what do these things mean? How can we not speak like that? And how can we not speak in words that also drive fear into people's amygdalas that like to oppress things and run away? There's I'm in deep therapy about this to deal with that, and let's say, for lack of a better word, heal the ancestral line and be like, why'd you guys all run away? I'm not gonna run away. So like just this Saturday, it was like, okay, you're going to be in an uncomfortable situation. You're not going to run away and you're not going to be anxious, avoidant. You're trapped. And you just have to sit through it. Oh, see, it's okay. Well, maybe you didn't have to leave all these places. Like imagine putting the M&M Mars Foundation through that giant billionaire family group, right? Will they ever get through something like that? I don't know. But even coming up with that idea is kind of hilarious. Like, I want to make sure we have a lot of like dark difficult stuff, like we have like the sun and the moon, like to go back to paganism, but like it's important that the world has both. But there are a lot of people in pain that aren't really living right now. They're living in abstraction, and to help them to remember is really important. Like it's all within them, but how do you have people remember so that they're not so stuck in this abstraction world that's giving them misery? Now, a lot of people are getting there that aren't rich, and a lot of kids of parents that are very rich have said to give 80 to 90% of their net worth to environmental causes. So the idea is to like find them, embrace them with open arms, and like give them a way to do things. Because everybody's ready. Everyone is ready right now. We're all kind of in pain, kind of searching for that truth and peace. That's why the meditation apps are doing so well and the mindfulness is doing well. But thankfully, we're all rewriting our brains with Web3, so that we don't have to try to do that within the Web 2.0 space and get immediately appropriated, because that's been very annoying. So hopefully keeping things in small pockets like DAOs and having good governance and not trying to make everything like brand new, but it's like everyone's like, let's make a new tribe. And it's like, well, don't call it that. Like you haven't even spent time with the tribe. Like, do you know how like there's this tribe that lives near the river. The founder of Calm Tech got so obsessed with like learning from people that he just like left and hung out with like First Nations people for like 10 years and didn't say anything for the first year. I was like, he's like, you guys are used to white people coming in and telling you stuff and like saving you and putting solar panels everywhere. But like no one comes to listen to you, so I'm just gonna listen. And one of his stories was really good. He said, okay, there's a bunch of rambunctious kids, it's like all their kids, and they're trying to tell them a story about the history of their tribe. And the kids won't sit still, but there's a river. And so they tell the kids, okay, swim across the river and come back. When they swim across the river and come back, they're exhausted and they can listen to the story and listen. Just an understanding of physicality, And so much of us don't have enough exercise, and so we get into all these little eddies and like want to eat caramel popcorn and run away. But we don't need to. But it also doesn't need to be like dire and horrible all the time either, and it doesn't need to be aggressive. I'm really at the core a Taoist, where I'm like, what's the least amount of movement or words that I can change or make to affect the biggest change? Because I don't want to like this is too much. Like the more overt you are in your movement and the more like hard you try, the easier it is to be like destroyed by something else. So like the least amount of movement, like Calm Tech is like, here's a very simple static website, and then people will be like, did you know that Microsoft used your framework? I'm like, great. They're like, don't you want to cut? I'm like, no. Microsoft realized they had too many people, and now they have to work to help people be in harmony with their software. like they're at that natural point where like they'll have to find this, like and it's about being there when they get to that point. Anyway.
That's
Go
awesome.
ahead, Scott. Sorry.
Oh, no. I was just gonna say, like, this was an awesome discussion overall. I think we're a little bit over time. We can kind of maybe just wrap a bit just to make sure that we stay on time. But I think this was just great, and I'm really happy to have all of you here. I will be hopping in a couple minutes on my side, but let's continue this in the chat for sure. And then maybe I'll give you Cole, give your last word.
Yeah,
I just want. Go ahead.
Which chat to continue this in?
So I've been adding you in it. So let me add to you again. So there's a chat that's been going on while we've been talking.
Oh no.
It's called Jan. It's called Jan 12 2022. It's a Discord thing. Like you wouldn't know, like if you don't use Discord a lot, that there's like generally threads alongside all conversations just to like have more inclusive practice.
I'm in like 50 Discord channels. It's just so funny. It's not showing up on mobile, but I'm afraid that if I click, there we go. Yay. All good. Thank you very much.
Of course. Yeah. So I mean, like, I think what I want to leave everybody with, or leave myself with more than anything, is that like a lot of emotions are coming up for me, and I think that like it's interesting how Web3 in my mind is part of like my individual healing, right? And like me being just like authentic, not for anybody else, but for myself, right? Because like, and you talk about listening, right? And like in my lived experience, like I grew up around wealthy white people, right? As like the only black person, the only person who was me in those rooms, and I spent the first like 26 years, or I'll say 26 years, or whatever. I'm 26 right now, so like I spent the last, let's say 22 years. I spent 22 years of my life listening to whiteness, right? Observing, understanding, kind of trying to connect with for survival, but also for understanding. And like I have taken so much away from that in understanding what's going on, right? And like I have realized that like Web3 is a part of me finally putting to words and communicating the understanding in a way that can be utilized and potentially weaponized for other people who feel the same, either within the construct of whiteness itself, or right, people who have been vilified and hurt by that construct. So like, I just realized that I have been listening like to that person who went into the indigenous space and listened. Right? I have been listening for the majority of my life. and now I'm like, sharing. And Web3 is just like this perfect vehicle, but also an empowering technology that I think can really revolutionize organization and how we get together and make change as like humans.
Yeah. I'm so excited to meet you. I'm excited to see all of you. I didn't even know too much about Gitcoin for some reason. I always feel like I'm simultaneously ahead and behind in Web3, which is delightful. So I'm gonna follow much more closely what everybody's working on, and if there's ways I can participate or come on here again in a less verbose way, I'd love to do that. So.
It wasn't, yeah, it wasn't verbose at all. I think like we touched on a lot of great threads, and like I learned a lot of history, like a lot of pieces that like I hadn't explored, and I need to go back through honestly the depth of the chat on that front. So I would love to have you more involved for sure, and we can continue that conversation. But yeah, thank you so much everyone for hopping. Um, and
Yeah.
Let's not forget Ben West that helped to introduce
Oh yeah,
Amber.
Ben, you've been on video. Do you want to jump in just like and give a last word as well?
I got about a million things to say, but maybe I'll just actually, just in the interest of time, ask what your Twitter handle is, Amber, and if you're okay with being quoted directly, or we prefer to just be kind of paraphrased. In we often do like a wrap up thread, but I just don't want to take for granted that you're okay with whatever you said here being shared publicly.
Oh yeah, yeah. My Twitter handle is Case Organic, and now that I'm not living under the poverty line anymore, I think it's safe for me to share more non-standard views. So yes, you can quote me.
Awesome. I very much enjoyed this conversation and everybody's input, and I just want to share my appreciation for everybody for all this conversation. Lots more to talk about, but maybe we can do it on the thread instead of us all having to hang out here in the little video boxes.
Yeah, I was afraid of the video box. I was like, oh man, sometimes I like to be a disembodied voice, but I like how it's half and half. I love the ability to be anonymous and compose your identity through your words and actions versus just your flat face. So, thank you so much, everybody. This was like a real treat, and I'll see you around on the tubes.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much.